So which kind of animals are most frequently victims of this event, not only coal? You talking about rabbits and other animals.
Mm-hmm. One important point, though, before we go into the different types of animals, is the eyewitnesses. The eyewitness link is the part that I think people keep overlooking. I have over half a dozen cases in which people in broad daylight on farms and ranches in the United States have seen small non-human creatures carrying a calf or a cow, and the animal either disappears or is later found mutilated. Now, you tell me, if you got 6 or 7 reports from people saying, I saw these strange, white-skinned, big-eyed creatures carrying a calf, and then I found it mutilated, who would you think was responsible? Now, yeah. So we have to give credence to the eyewitnesses. They don't have anything to gain to lie. People are trying to the best of their ability to describe exactly what they're seeing, even if they don't understand it. And the types of animals, I would say over the last 30 years worldwide, that maybe 85% of the animals found dead and mutilated with these strange cuts that we're talking about would be cows. The next category would be horses. And then after that, it would be hard to say, but it has included almost every domestic animal that you can think of, including cats and dogs, and wild game. I have seen pictures in the United States from park and forest agencies of deer, elk, exactly the same way.
What is the country with the highest number of cases, and what about the rest of the world, worldwide?
Well, getting numbers are hard. See, I come from a country where the media is considered to be on an equal footing, in a strange way, with the government. In other words, we have a constitution that protects freedom of speech, the ability to write and express ideas, which is different than other countries. And that means we report more things that might be more controlled by police in other countries. So to say that the United States has more mutilations than another country like Australia or Brazil, I think that's difficult to know. We certainly are aware that in the countries that have cattle, even in the areas of Japan now that have cattle, they've reported mutilations. In terms of the number of cattle grazing anywhere in the United States at any one time, I'm certain that the United States, Canada, Australia, and perhaps some South American countries, they would have the most cattle grazing on open land. Europe is a much more congested area. There's an emphasis here on dairy cattle more than lots of cattle grazing out in enormous land. It's just because these countries have so much land and there's so much area for thousands of animals to graze. So keep that in mind. And the issue of animal mutilations in Brazil, it's always been there. I don't know that any of us know how much has happened in Brazil, but it is a country that has had everything. Human abductions, animal mutilations, marks in the ground, marks on trees, burn, all sorts of things have happened in Brazil. But the English-speaking or other parts of the world, language is a problem. If you don't read and speak Spanish, you're not going to, or Portuguese, you're not going to be able to really understand what's happened there unless there are international conferences. And this is one of the values of international conferences, is being able to come together and share cases. If we knew what had happened in every country around the world for the last 50 years when it came to animals and humans, we might be shocked at how much has happened, but it's just been covered up.
You have cooperated with veterinaries, pathologists.
Yes.
What is the opinion of the science on this phenomenon? What should be the opinion of the science? What should be the method of study?
We need every kind of scientist to be helping us, and at the front line in animal mutilations are the pathologists, the veterinarian pathologists, the veterinarians. We've been having to use microbiologists and various people who have information concerning analysis of things, because we have found odd substances on mutilated animals that we've needed to get analysis. So I would say if you in Italy are interested in putting together some kind of a investigative package on if you had mutilations, what do you do? In the United States, Dr. Altschuler and I have prepared information that tells how to get excisions, what to put it in, how to get it to somebody who is a professional, get professional analysis, get a report, and those are all things that need to be done. And it's maybe something that I could help with those of you in Italy who would be willing to get our material and translate it into Italian and follow it up in that way. And if you want, I can give you my card, send me a letter, remind me of the interview, and then say, we'd like more information about how we handle this in a scientific way.
What is the most interesting case in which you have investigated?
The most interesting. Probably the Judy and Cindy Doherty case, mother-daughter traveling with 3 other family members in a car in 1973 outside of Houston, Texas. They see a light, they argue about what the light is, the light gets closer to the car, this goes on for about a half hour. The driver pulls the car over to the side of the road, and Judy Doherty, a mother, her teenage daughter was in the car. She gets out, and she walks to the back of the car because she wants to see the light more closely. The rest of it is missing time for all 5 people. About 2 hours were lost. When she got back inside the car, she thought she'd only been outside the car for a few seconds. When she got back inside the car, she said to everyone, "I don't feel good, and I'm thirsty. Let's hurry home." When they got to where a babysitter was keeping the kids, the lights followed them to that house too. And at that point, 11 people, adults and children, were standing in the front yard of a house when this enormous light comes down so closely that they could see what they said were pale yellow windows going around the rim of this object. And she screamed. She was terrified. She yelled at the children not to run toward it, which they were starting to do, and she did not know why she was so terrified. That was 1973, 5 years later, after suffering nightmares, horrible headaches, not being able to sleep, not knowing what was wrong except that it had something to do with that night. She went to a medical doctor. The medical doctor decided that they needed to do something to break through what the doctor assessed was some kind of a memory blockage, amnesia about that night that might relate to a trauma that was causing all these nightmares and headaches. So they did hypnosis. And some people who were associated with that case knew about the fact that in 1979, I was working on this documentary, and her hypnosis had been done in 78. They sent me an audio cassette, and she discusses an animal going up in a beam of light. So I contacted Dr. Leo Sprinkle in Wyoming, who was head of the University of Wyoming Counseling and Testing Center. He's a psychologist. And I asked him if he would be willing to do hypnosis, a second session, if I could convince this woman that this was important. And in March of 1980, we did the second hypnosis session in her life with her. And it was that session that we were filming in which she finally broke through this amnesia. She could clearly see a brown and white calf going up in a pale yellow beam of light. And then, as she still does not understand, she found herself inside of a round room with 2 small gray-colored beings with big black slanted, well, actually, they weren't big black slanted eyes in this particular room. The eyes were like a snake's, vertical pupils, not blinking. And she watched while they took instruments and excised tissue from testicles, eyeball, and tongue of this same calf that she'd seen go up in the beam of light. 10 years later, in 1990, 10 years, that's right. A Strange Harvest was broadcast in 1980, and that's when we did Judy's hypnosis, so it was 10 years later in 1990. Her daughter, who had resisted everything about this, did not want to be involved, did not want hypnosis, was very resistant, contacted her mother and said, I now want to find out more about what happened. So working with another hypnotist named John Carpenter in Missouri, where the mother and daughter now live, we did a hypnosis session with the daughter, who is now in her early 30s and had been a teenager when this happened. And in the first hypnosis session with the daughter, she described seeing a calf going up in a pale yellow beam of light. And then she was taken to some place also with round rooms in which she saw birds, pigs, all kinds of animals and animal parts in a room. So I think myself that this case is the most dramatic link, the strongest case involving two completely separate people involved in an abduction, mother and daughter, both seeing a calf going up in a pale beam of light, both seeing something related to excisions of tissue.
This is very interesting, this case. Now I make you some question about the June.
I just don't want to miss lunch.
About the cover-up. What is your opinion on William Howe? Is he an agent of discredit for you?
I just don't want to comment on him. I don't want to make any comment on him. I don't want to make any comment on him. There's no question in my mind, just like there's no question in Stanton Friedman's mind, that the Truman administration in the United States assigned several political, medical, and military leaders as a study group to study and assess both what were the silver discs that were crashing in the United States, what were the bodies that they were taking out of them, dead and alive, there were live ones, and what were the implications for the national security. That happened. Now what they call themselves today, and whether they call themselves MJ-12, I don't think that's important. I think what is important is that the list that Stanton and others have investigated, that included General Twining, that included Dr. Vannevar Bush, that included the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency, those people were involved. The cover-up has been in place for 50 years because our government concluded that the world was not ready for this information, that they did not have enough answers, and until they did, there had to be an enforced policy of silence to prevent mass hysteria. And I think the biggest comment on this story is it's 50 years later. The policy of silence is still in place. And that says to me they don't have many more answers.